My name is Father Jurgen Liias. I am technically what's called a senior priest. I'm part of the Ordinariate, which is this special kind of provision that Pope Benedict established for former Anglicans or Episcopalians. I had been an Episcopal priest for 40 years and became a Catholic priest through that provision in 2013 when I was ordained. Became a Catholic in 2012 and was pastor of an Ordinariate parish called St. Gregory the Great, but decided after doing that for 4 years that I wanted to be a little freer in my time, particularly for family responsibilities as a father and a grandfather and a husband, which is not a challenge for most Catholic priests, but it is for those of us in the Ordinariate. I had an interesting childhood in that I came to this country as a refugee from Germany. I was born in Germany. My parents were refugees from Eastern Europe, and we came to this country in 1951 as displaced persons, they were called in those days, DPs. And after spending time at DP camps, we wound up being taken in by an Episcopal priest who was himself a celibate priest. He had no family. And so I grew up in the rectory of this Episcopal church. And from the time, as far back as I can remember, particularly through the influence of that very saintly old priest, I wanted to be a priest when I grew up, as far back as I can remember. So I never changed my mind, went through grammar school, high school, college, and then on to seminary and was ordained a Episcopal priest about as young as you can by the canons of the church, and was an Episcopal priest for 40 years. And my faith was sort of varied and grew. And in fact, probably in the shaping of my faith when I was young, I would say most of my faith kind of grew in an area of a kind of liberal Protestant, because that was sort of the dominant ethos, particularly in the churches that I grew up in. But then when I was a young priest, I had a profound evangelical conversion to Christ through the charismatic renewal, which was breaking out in the church. And as I jokingly say, I was ordained first and converted later, but in a way that was really a conversion to Christ, and certainly what we would call Orthodox Christianity, not a kind of liberal Christianity that kind of got disconnected from Christ, but really a kind of more evangelical conversion to the cross of Christ and to the redemption of Christ. The charismatic experience of conversion, particularly to the cross, so I'd have to say the atonement. I mean, the understanding of the atonement, that Christ's death was essential and significant, and that something profound happened in his death for the changing of the universe, and particularly the relationship between human beings and God. I really that wasn't really part of my kind of liberal Protestant tradition, which was more God is love and, a kind of humanistic faith that, and interesting enough, not only didn't speak much about the cross, but almost had an antithetical approach. I remember starting to read theology that repudiated the cross as a piece of divine sadomasochism or something like that. It just was, and so it was a profound conversion to the reality of the objective reality of the atonement. And then once I understood that, then the sacraments all came alive. The Eucharist, for example, suddenly we're participating in this mystery of Christ's atonement, literally. And all, particularly the Catholic understanding of this being the sacrifice of the Mass and representing the sacrifice of the Mass. Suddenly it all made sense. Now I did the Eucharist before, and it was a nice thing to have. It had, but I never really believed in it in any. I didn't know I didn't believe in it. I just sort of did it. And then suddenly now I understood why I was doing it and what it meant. So in that sense, a conversion experience through the charismatic renewal then opened the door to a kind of conversion in almost every other dimension of the faith, and certainly the sacramental life fully. Unlike a lot of people involved in the charismatic renewal move away from the liturgical, I found in my life it drove me into it, and I became more Catholic in the Episcopal sense of that word. We use it in a small c, more Catholic-minded in terms of the sacraments and the liturgical life of the Anglican Church, as it was. In the Episcopal Church, by and large, the feminist movement had set the agenda for the Episcopal understanding of justice, and justice meant access to abortion, and by and large. And so the church was fundamentally a pro-choice church, and I found myself profoundly distressed. I mean, that was my first significant kind of crisis, cognitive dissonance, that how can a church be, its moral compass be so off? And that's where I began to ask some deeper questions about the nature of the church, the nature of authority. I felt like I was getting in the pulpit, believing that I was sincerely trying to proclaim the faith and what the Bible taught, and yet my bishop was saying the exact opposite. And I felt like I don't want to be in a place, I felt uncomfortable that I was giving people the challenge to pick me or their bishop, or my opinion as opposed to his opinion. And I'm not interested in winning a debate on my opinion. I wanted to be able to stand in the pulpit and say, this is what the church teaches. So that forced me to struggle with not only the actual truth claims around these moral issues, contraception, obviously, abortion, homosexuality, but also behind it, the bigger question, how do we know what is truth? And that made the Roman Catholic understanding of the church and authority and the work of the Spirit in guiding the church into truth more and more cogent for me. And ultimately, I was convinced that this is true.